the leaders need to engage with all levels. I think it's really important to understand what's going on the ground in the outdoors, and those people are delivering out there every day. I think that's super important. I think one of the things that always disappoints me
In this Sports and Outdoor Mentors episode, I chat with Dave Bunting MBE. Dave spent the first part of his career in the British Army as a physical trainer, ultimately leading an expedition that took more than 2 years of planning to the West Ridge of Everest. He now works with businesses, helping them build high-performance teams. He's also an inspirational public speaker and expedition leader. We discussed that iconic Everest expedition, his time as outdoor development manager at the Carnegie Great Outdoors School, and his recent switch to entrepreneurship. I hope you enjoy the episode. If you do, please like and comment, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. So, Dave, what would you like the audience to get out of this discussion today?
I suppose the experiences and ups and downs of my life in the outdoor industry would be the best thing to take away.
One of your quotes you use sometimes in your public speaking is, unless you try to do something beyond what you have already mastered, you will never grow. So I'm interested, why do you obviously like that quote so much, and what does it mean to you?
I think just taking lots of opportunities and taking experiences and just giving yourself the opportunity to grow. I remember when I was 16 years old joining the army, and my cousin said to me, volunteer for everything. I'll never forget that. And he'd been in the RAF, and I think, by taking those opportunities and throwing myself into everything, it just gives you that chance to develop, make mistakes and grow from it.
But so you've spent 24 years in military service, I believe, and pretty much most of that time at varying seniorities, obviously getting more senior as time went on in physical, as a physical training instructor. So, and in fact now you're doing, let's say, leadership development, you're doing public speaking, you're doing expeditions, which we'll talk about. So it seems to me that, let's say, personal development or the development of others is a red thread actually throughout your career. It's been the consistent topic. So why is that? Where did that come from? And is that something conscious that you've thought, okay, I like doing this, or I'm good at this, or what? What drew you to that area?
I've always liked being around people, and I think the outdoors for me and doing physical activity in the outdoors has been something where I've felt my biggest connection with people. And I think I was very fortunate when I was coming through my early years and had some brilliant, inspiring people helping me. And I think I just naturally felt that I wanted to then use the skills I was picking up to help other people as well. I really enjoyed it. I found there was nothing more rewarding than running a program. And at the end of the week, somebody shaking your hand and you can genuinely see how good a time they've had during that week with you, and that's massively rewarding.
Do you have a particular approach, or have you had a particular approach throughout your career to ensure that those people are getting so much out of what you're teaching them? Is there a way that you approach it? Because of course, when you're instructing many different people, it must be quite difficult to somehow ensure you're bringing everybody with you, because everybody learns in a different way and gets different things from different activities. So it must be quite tough to do that when you're working with multiple different people.
I think, when I look back across whether it's expeditions or programs or courses I've been involved in, I think one of the big things I've always tried to do is set a nice tone for people, set an environment that's a little bit relaxed and fun, just let people settle in and get the most out of it. And I think that's something that's been a big part of what I've done, whether it's an expedition where you're setting people up for a long period of time, or whether it's just being with somebody for half a day, by setting a nice tone for the day and letting people relax, they enjoy it more, for sure.
But that must be quite I'm just thinking about it in terms of an expedition, for example. Getting that balance right must be quite difficult because, of course, you're oftentimes taking people into an environment where there is a real, let's say, some almost threat of life. Obviously, in some cases, very much so. So, I guess it must be difficult to get that balance right, to not be too strong, serious, straightforward, because it could be viewed as life, and sometimes is a life and death situation. So how are you finding that balance?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think in the early stages, setting a nice environment for people to be in, a relaxed and fun environment, you can then get to know each other well, start to trust each other, and that trust will then build from that initial foundation to be something that can take you into those sorts of environments where it needs to be a bit more serious. And if you've built a really good relationship from those foundations, then you're going to be able to operate well together.
So I'm interested, you said that you joined the army when you were 16. So was that something that you had aspired to do from an even younger age, or were you like me at that sort of age where you weren't really so much kind of into formal education? What was it that helped you kind of take that path?
Well, I grew up with a granddad who'd been in the thick of the Second World War in Burma, in the Chindits, and so I grew up around him, and my great uncle had been in the army in the war as well, and my dad had done a little stint in national service. So I did grow up a lot around the military and conversations about the military, and so I sort of naturally off the back of that joined the Army Cadets at 13 years old. So I spent 3 years in the Army Cadets with my best friend, and we just loved it. It fitted us so well. Yeah. We just loved the adventure, the camaraderie, the fun, and then that naturally led on to wanting to join the army.
You mentioned the word team there, and I believe you've led 15 Himalayan expeditions.
I've been on 15.
15, okay.
I've either led or been in the leadership team of most of those expeditions.
Of course, one of those was the Everest expedition, so the West Ridge, which I believe is one of the most, if not the most difficult, and certainly something that's very rare in terms of being done. And we'll maybe talk about what you learned from that trip a little bit later. But just picking up on what you said about the team, in the past you've described the people that you were on that trip with as the most fantastic team I've ever been involved with. So I'm really interested to know, was that by happenstance and just you built that relationship over the time? Because it's clearly a very long process, and we'll come on to that as well. Or was that, did you have a kind of clear plan in mind in terms of, okay, what are the type of people that you want to do with? Who are the type of people you need? Who are the type of people maybe you don't need in those situations? So how did you get to that point where that was obviously such a great team for you?
I think, by the time I went to Everest, that was my 10th expedition to the Himalayas. So I've been around all sorts of different teams, from novice teams to really high-performing teams, and I'd been involved in the leadership part of the expedition. I'd also just been a climber on the expedition, on my earlier expeditions. But I'd certainly got a good feel for the sort of personality that goes down well on a big, long expedition, and the skills that are needed as well. And so I think by the time I got to Everest, I had a pretty clear view of the types of people who wanted in the team and the types of people who didn't. And so, using those other experiences, it really helped. And I think we put a huge effort into the selection. Okay. I was able to sort of take all the selection processes I'd been involved in and take the best bits out of them all and add my own little bits as well to come up with something that I thought was going to get the best team together.
So you mentioned there that you worked with, let's say, novice teams up to very high-performing teams. So apart from, let's say, the physical experience of climbing or the physical skills, let's say, what's What are the differences that you see in terms of the mindset in between, let's say, potentially novice skills crews and really high performing teams that you've worked with?
The novice teams that go to the Himalayas, there's a fairly big fear factor to begin with. No matter how much training you've done, you're then going into an environment that's, famously scary. It's big, it's intimidating, you're dealing with a lot more physical in terms of the altitude and so on. So I think with novice teams, there's certainly a lot of fear, no matter what you've done in your preparation. But that's exciting to nurture them and to bring those people on to enjoy the experience and get the most out of it. Whereas those that are more high performing are people that are a little bit more settled in, and they put behind them all the basics of the outdoor experiences, that what it's like to travel, the basics of climbing and all that sort of stuff. So they're able to more focus on the more serious aspects of the expedition, the detail of the climbing, the relationships within the climbing. They're able to give that much more because all that's behind them, they're comfortable with all that section, and they're able to get the best out of the experience.
You touched on there the fact that some expeditions, so obviously like the Everest expedition, takes a massive amount of planning. And now much of the audience of the podcast is people that are working more on the business side of the outdoors. But when we chatted in advance, I saw a real kind of similarity in terms of the level of preparation, the level of planning that goes into a trip like to the West Ridge trip to Everest, to launching maybe a new category or a new business unit or something like that. So can you talk a little bit about that process? Because if I remember well, the Everest trip was, if we kind of start at the very beginning, really from idea, it was over 3 years of planning, if I remember.
That's right.
So can you talk a little bit about that and what that looked like and how you handled that? Because I think, again, if my memory serves me well, you were the first, I'm not sure of the right terminology, but non-officer within the British Army that led an expedition like this. So what was that process like, and how did you get to that point to be in that position?
I think, lots of the big 8,000 metre peak expeditions have been led by senior officers in the past.
Okay.
So I was really keen to sort of break that mould. And inspire people and sort of widen that group of people that could lead expeditions. By the time I put myself forward to lead that expedition, I was in that fortunate position that 9 Himalayan expeditions behind me. I was the chief instructor of a mountain training centre. I was a well-known name in the Army Mountaineering Association. And so I had some relationships and I had some trust from people and credibility to be able to do that. So that helped me a great deal to push that and get that going. When you do a big expedition, most of the big expeditions I've been involved in were 2 to 3 years of preparation and planning. Everest one in particular was 3 years because you wanted to take time to get the right team together. As I mentioned, the selection process being really important. But it's one of the most important things for me. I think I'm a reasonably organised person, so I think it's really important to be organised and be good at attention to detail. But in terms of the big factor in organising a big expedition, the key thing for me was surrounding myself with the right people. So it's so gigantic, organising an 8,000 metre peak expedition. You can't do it all on your own. So I was really key, really focused on who was going to be involved, who was going to take on sponsorship, who was going to get the oxygen together, who was going to get the equipment together, who was going to head up the training and so on. So, it's really important to have those people around you. And for me also, I thrive off of that as well. If you've got good people around you, you'll get 10 times more work out of me because it just drives you and it brings you along and you feel part of a good team to be able to do something special. And I think, when you're doing something like Everest or a big expedition, there is a crazy amount of detail involved. And so, many heads involved that are all working well together, it is really effective.
When you were building that team, was it all people that you'd worked with before or been on expeditions with before, or were there were new people as well to you?
Yeah, initially I had a couple of very key people who were involved, who I'd known for a long time, been on expeditions with, been in those environments with, and I trusted immensely. But they also then introduced a couple of people they had the same relationship with, so I could, there was no requirement to worry about that person who's too away from you, because this person you've got massive trust with is telling me that they are fantastic. And so, I had this core team on Everest, people I trusted. Some people call them my lieutenants, but they helped me immensely on the expedition. Everything we did, whether it's planning, preparation, or also the consideration of people who were taken through selection and what they thought of each individual, what they bring to the team. So that was really important.
Later on, actually, you had to take the difficult decision to stop the expedition and turn around and go back down to base camp and call it off because I think there was a high risk of avalanche, if I remember well. So what was the process that you went through to take that decision? Was that something that you were kind of sharing and discussing with your lieutenants? Was that something that you were like, okay, no, I'm very clear, this isn't going to work, the risk is too high? Or how did you come to that decision?
Well, I certainly did, for me, there was a huge amount of discussion went on. I didn't just turn to my leadership team or my lieutenants, I turned to the whole team really. I spent a couple of days, because we had that time at base camp to speak to not only those people I mentioned, but also the head Sherpa. I had a very experienced mountain guide in the film crew who's had a life of experience with avalanche. So I chatted to everybody, tried to get a feeling of the whole team about the situation. Certainly didn't make that decision on my own, but I think in setting up a good leadership team beforehand, I felt super supported in whatever I decided to do. So after that time at base camp, when we'd spent a couple of days having these conversations and weighing on what to do, things became much clearer in my mind about what was the right thing to do. But ultimately, after all those conversations, really, for me, the decision came back to my training. That sending somebody up the mountain in those extreme avalanche conditions put a high risk on their life, and I was just unwilling to do that with the knowledge I now had. If somebody had been avalanched in the first summit team without me having that knowledge, we were all signed up to that, and that can happen. But now you've got the knowledge of the extremity of the avalanche conditions. When you've got that information as a leader, I was just unwilling to put people back in that. I thought to myself, how could I go home and explain to a partner, somebody's family, that I've allowed them to go back into those extreme conditions, knowing they were extreme, and having not come home? I just couldn't not to do that.
When you got back from that trip, let's say quite shortly afterwards, what was your reflection? Did you view the trip as a failure?
When we got back from the expedition, in reading in the first few weeks after that, or right to this day, I've reflected on it a lot, I certainly never viewed it as a failure. And I think the reason I didn't view it as a failure is because, the Himalayas is a challenging place. And, I've been on multiple expeditions where we didn't get to tops of mountains, but I never viewed them as failures. I just viewed them as life lessons to take to the next expedition or the next thing you're doing in life. And so I certainly never viewed it as that, and nor did the rest of the team. In fact, I really only came across one person that viewed it as a failure, and that was somebody on social media who then got attacked by everybody else on social media. Because I don't think, I think when you go on these sorts of expeditions, you go in there for a life experience, you go in there to work as a team, you go in there to do something special. And, for me, that's not a failure. And, my upset around us not getting to the top is almost it isn't the fact that we failed at anything, it's just we were so close, and we had such a great team, and we were, hours away from success, and that would have been so special. That's probably where the upset comes, not from having failed at anything or anybody in the team having failed at anything.
You used the words there that it was more about kind of learning life experiences from the situation rather than viewing it as a failure. So what did you take away from that in terms of when you were, because that's not been the last big expedition that you've been on. So what did you kind of take away from that maybe changed the way you approached things later?
I don't think off the back of it, obviously with it being the Everest trip, being 3 years in preparation and 3 months on the expedition, you learn a huge amount. I think because all the logistics were very complex and with the media involved, and there was a huge amount of partnership that went on and relationships and so on, I think, I learned an immense amount on all aspects of expeditioning, really, to take on to other future trips. And but I think that the biggest one, coming back to probably a key part of this conversation, was about relationships and the importance of those. So when I've done other expeditions, they may be smaller expeditions, but nevertheless, the relationships with the people on the ground are so important in the team. Yeah. For people to get the most out of the trip and enjoy the trip is really important.
So when you you finished your military service, I believe you started a business with 2 or 3 friends in the Bavarian Alps. So I'm really interested to learn about, what were the lessons from that? So, I guess, first of all, maybe why and what did you do? And then just to kind of talk a little bit about that experience and what you learned from that.
Yeah, well, I decided to leave the forces as an opportunity to leave. I could have stayed in for longer, but I thought I'd like to do something different. I've been in the military since I was 16. And so along with 3 close friends who were all involved in the Everest project and in partnership with Leeds Metropolitan University, we decided to take on this business in the Bavarian Alps, running leadership and team development programs in an amazing environment. And I'd been based in the Bavarian Alps, so I knew all about it. I knew the value of that environment. But we went out there, and it was a pretty intense start to that business because you're up against it. You've got to make the money to make it a successful business. And so it was a pretty steep learning curve to begin with. I'm not now part of a massive organisation. There's a small number of us. And I think we probably all felt that. We're not part of a big organisation anymore, so we've got to do everything. But as we kicked it off, at the same time the recession kicked off, and not being business people, we didn't see that coming. So it was extremely difficult to make it a success because all the big companies that could afford to come to us didn't want to be seen to be doing that because it's not the right thing to be doing, going in the outdoors and so on. So, we really had a challenge with trying to make it work. But we did make it work for a period with our own network, military, the university, and other organisations that we could encourage to come out there. And so it was an amazing experience, and some amazing partners working on that with us. Some of the programmes we run, I still look back at today as some of the best programmes we've been involved in. The biggest challenge was that trying to make it work financially was extremely difficult because we committed ourselves to a property. So we had our own building, which has many, many benefits because you can control all of the programme, especially if you're in a good venue or a good location like where we were. But the challenge was that the bills were just too much, and so to pay the bills when a recession was going on and big companies aren't coming to you as we planned to work with the university, we just couldn't deal with that. And so it wasn't possible to keep going. And so, we had to stop it before it went any further. But again, at the time, it was tough. But I now look back on it, and I've looked back on it for quite a long time, as it was an amazing experience. So although we lost some money, and although, it was really difficult to deal with, I do look back and think we learned a massive amount from doing that. And so I don't look at it as a failure. I do look at it as, it was a tough thing. But yeah, I've taken experiences from that into the rest of my life.
The 4 people that you did, the 3 others that you did the business with, you'd climb with them, so they were part of the fantastic team, to use your words, from that trip. How did you choose those people, or was it more, it was just kind of a mutual understanding, a mutual plan that, okay, this is what we're going to do together? Or did you think more differently of, okay, now, yes, we're going to be doing fundamentally work outdoors, but also it's going to be running a business, so maybe there's different skills that we need and maybe complementary skills that we're looking for. How did you approach that in terms of deciding who you did that with? Was there a kind of clear approach?
Well, I think, it was a mutual plan. I didn't select the team. I think we had such an amazing experience, not only on the West Ridge of Everest together, but other things we've done together as well. And I think going into that, I personally, I think we all thought that the different skills we had really complemented each other. We'd all had very different careers in the military, very, very different. And I think we looked around and thought to ourselves that, we've got a bit of that, we've got a bit of that, and that could all come together into a really good business. Yeah. I think one of the difficult things was, probably the biggest mistake I believe that we made, was by taking on a property, we ended, we had big bills to deal with. Yeah. When I look back at it now, in simple terms, would have been better selling ourselves with our rucksacks on our back, and it's as straightforward as that. We can run programs for you and we'll deal with the venue. Yeah. And we should have kept it really simple to begin with small overheads, and built it up from there. And I think if we'd have done that, we could have been successful. Yeah. But the major overheads killed us. But
then that, if I understand well, that then led to an opportunity to join Leeds Beckett University to head up a new outdoor program, if I understood well.
Well, I think because we've been in partnership with the university in Bavaria and with the West Ridge of Everest, they're one of our partners. I understood a little bit about the university, I understood what they wanted to do, and a new role came up, and it was a role that I thought I could really fit into well. So I applied for that job, and it was to work with a very small department, Carnegie Great Outdoors, and help them grow. So I was the outdoor development manager, and we were looking to develop what we're doing, bring in new clients, set up new programs, and build it from there. So it was a new role within that department.
And I think one of those programs was the Battleback Centre you did with the Royal Legion. So I did research on this and looked at some of the videos, and it's quite amazing, I would say, the work that you did and the reaction it obviously had on the people that you were working with. So maybe if you could just kind of share a little bit about that experience and what you did with them and what that brought to you.
So interestingly, when the Bavarian business folded, we didn't completely fold actually the business in Bavaria. We just went about it in a different way, and we moved away from it. The business actually continued. But one of my partners in the business went to the Royal British Legion. So he was the project manager of the new Battleback Centre, and he knew what the university was capable of. And I was now in a role at the university, so he knew about my network and experience. So he approached us to see if we were interested in helping set up the Battleback Centre. And obviously we had all the academic experience and skills combined with the outdoor skills, and so it was a match made in heaven really to help set up the Battleback Centre. I think the Royal British Legion to begin with probably didn't quite know what they wanted to do. It was all very new to them, a new idea they were investing in, and so it was a super exciting programme, and it was a combination of outdoor activities and adaptive sport. And having been an outdoor instructor and in the Army Physical Training Corps, I've sort of been involved in both of those worlds to a degree. What we needed to then bring in was some specialists. So the adapted sport specialists we brought into the team as well to help us learn from that. We worked with some specialists from Health Heroes who helped develop it as well. But one of my big roles, a little bit like Everest West Ridge, was to bring together the team of people who are going to deliver it on the ground. And so I was able to sit back and look at my career in the military. Who are the best people for this that I know? And so I was able to look at recruiting those people into the team. And again, as with Everest West Ridge, they then introduced me to other people who they had worked with. And so we grew the team from there. And it's the Battle Back programme, which has now been running for about 13 years, is an absolutely amazing programme, working with wounded Indian and Sikh soldiers and veterans. And it really is, it's probably, when I look back at my outdoor career, it's probably the bringing together of all the best bits, expeditions and adaptive sport, and all the different things I brought into that programme. But key to that programme are the people that deliver it. You know, again, like the West Ridge, we took a lot of time over selecting the right people to deliver that. And, you know, if you get the right people, like that programme, the right people with the right support around them, given by the Royal British Legion, amazing things can happen. And I think they set an environment over there. Again, going back to what we were saying earlier, it's an environment that allows people to feel good about themselves, to thrive, to get the best out of what they're doing. And it really is a special programme. And I think it's going to go from strength to strength.
You've mentioned again there the importance of the selection process, the recruitment of the people. So was there, because obviously, again, it's in a slightly different situation, a different environment, so you're maybe looking for different skills. Was there how did you go about, again, kind of finding those right people to help you with the Battle Back Centre?
Well, I think that initially I had some ideas, but most of my ideas were probably based on the classic outdoor, you know, sort of bringing people in who were great performers in the outdoor, great instructors, mentors in the outdoors, in all the different activities. The adaptive sport side of things was probably a bit newer to me, so I had to listen to people in the team that are more experienced in that area. But Battle Back goes much further beyond that. So, you know, art therapy and all the different softer skills of developing people, you know, were important to bring those experience with instructors into the team. So we had people in the team who were, you know, incredibly experienced in the expedition world, but we had people who were very good at working in the corporate world. We had some people who weren't really outdoor instructors, but they had worked with coaching. They'd worked at coaching people who had been through some difficult things in their lives, coaching young people, older people, you know, just bringing a hugely diverse team together. When I think about that team in my head now, it's a real collection of, you know, covering all bases to make sure that those people that come on a programme have got somebody there that they'll be able to connect with. They've got somebody that will have had a life experience that they can help guide them. And, you know, that diversity of team was really, really important. And I think, you know, it was, again, each person I brought into the team, if you selected the right person, they would have ideas that would be able to bring somebody in different, that bring a new skill into it. So you grow in the team and the abilities all the time.
But I think when you were with Leeds Beckett at the Carnegie Outdoors Centre there, you also started working with businesses, so corporate clients, so working with them on team building and leadership development. So I'm interested because in those situations, you're put into, let's say, somehow a fixed environment. You know, you're working with a leadership team that is predefined that you have no control over. And so how did you find that? Because in those situations, you know, you get what you're given, if you like.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, how did you kind of get into that, and how did you find that kind of different aspect of working with predetermined teams from a point of view of developing them and helping them build as a team?
Yeah, as I realised when I started working with corporates that they do end up in a position where they're often not choosing the people around them. And I've had that luxury on most of the things I've been involved in, that I'm able to choose. Well, with expeditions in particular, obviously lots of things in the military where I didn't choose who were the leaders and so on. You get put in that situation. But I think when you're working with corporates, it's quite different to working with the military. And I think, you just got to approach that in a very careful way, because you can guarantee that there are going to be some people in there, particularly when they come into our world and what we're in. Often the corporate things we're delivering are in an outdoor environment. So you might have a team or a leadership team where you get some people who are very comfortable being in that environment, some people who are way away from that. But then that offers an opportunity for them to work well as a team and support the person that's not so comfortable in that environment, and wind back in the person that's overly confident in that environment. So often actually it can create a nice balance, and a lot of the time I have found that. Occasionally, obviously, you get the odd person who really pushes back on everything you're doing, and you just don't really want to be there. But I think if you carefully approach it, and it goes back to making a nice environment, making it fun to begin with, and building things up very progressively, you can often win people over and give them a good experience, and then they want to go as a team and get a lot out of the experience on the programme.
When you're working with corporate clients, what's the standard brief?
It can differ, massively, really. So we have run corporate events where it's pure fun almost.
Okay.
Just to get them in a different environment, away from computers and mobile phones, and go and do something different together. That is quite often the brief.
Okay.
It's just particularly being in that different environment, because some people are able to shine more in that environment, or it's even a bit of a reward to be away from work. But we have also run structured leadership programs where it's academics working alongside outdoor instructors to give that experience and that learning, and it might be an accredited course they're getting involved in as well. Okay. They can differ massively, those types of courses. Of course, the ones where you're just giving people a nice experience and a bit of fun, they are very straightforward to be involved with. The ones where there's more structure and accreditation involved, and probably a more serious outcome they want, they're rewarding programs, but the staff you have on those programs need to be top notch to be able to have the conversations, particularly senior teams, and also read off of what's happening there and then to steer the next part of the program, or to steer the conversation, and be able to react to what's happening on the ground, or react to what people are saying to them.
Was there any surprises or things that surprised you, having gone from, let's say, a very controlled, structured environment in terms of leading courses, doing instruction within the army, within the military, to then leading courses and doing development programs from a corporate client point of view? Was there, when for the first half a dozen or so or whatever, was there something like, wow, I didn't expect that, that's different than what I expected, and then did you have to adapt things because of that?
I think I was, most of the time I've been really pleasantly surprised is the wrong word, but I've really enjoyed working on corporate, and they've had some great experience. Probably initially when I got out of the military, I maybe worked in corporate, and I probably didn't expect them to be quite as up for it, adventurous, tough, whatever's required maybe in the outdoors. And a lot of people surprised me in those early days. And I think, that's great when you've got people that are really up for it, and really, that are either up for it physically or mentally or both. And, you can help nurture them through whichever one might be a bit of an anxiety. Yeah. But mostly it's been super rewarding, not too surprising now, because I'm used to working with corporates a lot. And it's something I want to carry on doing.
Yeah. Okay. So there's, since you left military service, you've tended to focus on, let's say, 3 pillars, I call them. So we talked about 2 already. So about the expeditions, about kind of the development programs, leadership programs with corporates, but you're also doing public speaking. And I think you've done public speaking actually for a long time, so for 20 years. So in fact, while you were still in military service, I think. So I'm really interested, what kind of got you into that in the first place, especially still being in military service?
I think, because I started doing the outdoor thing quite young, I think it probably all started with coming home, and, I've always liked taking photographs. I'm not a particularly good photographer, but I've been in environments you don't need to be a good photographer. You just need to point the camera. But I think when I first come off some of my climbing trips, I would maybe do a little presentation to the pub at home or to the family or wherever it be. But of course I was in the military, so you've also got an audience, whether it's your colleagues in the military or particularly if you work in an outdoor centre. You know, they have evenings that need filling, and often if you get an inspirational talk, which I got when I was a young person, you get inspired by those talks. So I was lucky enough to probably do presenting from an early age, coming off of all my climbing trips and all my expeditions. So it's probably an understatement, and I've probably been doing speaking for 30 years.
Okay.
But of course, when you're in the forces, you know, most of that is, you know, to colleagues, to fill evenings or entertain or to brief somebody on another expedition or whatever it be. But when the Everest trip happened in 2006, I got more into presenting where you're trying to sell yourself to partners. So we were going to see corporate clients to try and get them to support us. So you're doing presentations about your expedition and you're trying to hook them to get involved. So that's probably was the turning point to becoming more of a professional speaker, or more of a corporate speaker. And so I was lucky enough to then do lots of presentations around the Everest window, both before and after. So you're obviously coming back and telling the story after. But what I found with it is, well, I love it to begin with. You meet so many interesting people. I've spoken to such different companies and such different audiences, but I find it super rewarding. You know, I find that those corporate audiences really like an adventure story. Yeah. Because you've got the impact of the images, you've got probably a story that to them will feel very different to their normal world. But then you've got the challenge of taking the lessons from that and putting it into their world, which I really enjoy doing that. And there are a lot of lessons to be taken from expeditions and working together as a team that can be transferred over to a corporate organisation. And so I find that super rewarding. And, you know, I think, you know, when I've been doing speaking events, I particularly enjoy the challenge of the Q&A afterwards. Because, you know, you get some well-travelled, intelligent people, senior people who've been in business, and some of the questions they tease out of you are just, they keep you on your toes. I find that fantastic.
People has been a recurring topic of this discussion, so I'm interested, and let's maybe not have too many people because of the time, but looking back, who have been the people that have most influenced you over your career, would you say?
Now, I anticipated this question was coming, and I think, you know, when I reflect back, one of the things that there were some names that I started to look at, and, you know, I think in particular one name that stands out from a lot is a guy called Nick Harding, who is on the Battlepack team now. I've known him I've known him for 30 years. We met in Norway, where he was my boss. And Nick was both a fabulously friendly person, kind, genuine, funny, but he was also a really top performer. So I had real respect for him for both of those things. And I think, you know, he was somebody who helped me change the direction in my career as well. Because at the time I was thinking of leaving, and he was the person that said to me, you do realise you can stay in and go on a career of working in the outdoors, working in the mountains, by joining the Army Physical Training Corps. So he really recruited me to stay in and do that. And he's a person that stayed in my life since I met him in Norway. I got him involved in the West Ridge team as an advisor, and now he's a member of the coaching team at Battlepack. So he's been a real big influence on me. As has Nick Challoner, who was one of the bosses in the Army Physical Training Corps. And he helped steer my career when I joined the Physical Training Corps to get the best out of me. He's the person that sent me, or was part of the team that sent me to join the German Army to get involved with them as well. So again, he was a very down-to-earth person, a very likeable person, very approachable person, but a person I had a lot of respect for. But I think, you know, there are so many names that I could name. I've been lucky to be around a lot of amazing people. I would say the close friends that are around me as well, that have been around for years, they've been a big influence on me as well. Always there to call upon, always there to support me. So there's a lot of names there that I could be here all night talking about.
Well, two's good. And maybe the answer to the next question is connected to some of the people you just mentioned, but what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I think the best piece of advice I've ever been given was the piece of advice, I did touch on it earlier in the conversation, and that piece of advice came from a cousin at 16 years old, which was volunteer for everything.
Yeah.
And I think by doing that, when you join the forces in particular, it's just a mindset of grabbing opportunities. Occasionally I volunteer for an opportunity and then regret it, but generally by having that mindset of volunteering for things and taking opportunities while you can, I think is the best piece of advice I've ever had.
Looking back over your career, what's been the biggest learning you've made from what you would consider to be a mistake or a failure or something along those lines?
Yeah, I think the biggest lesson, really, and it's a lesson that I'm probably not too good at myself. You shouldn't beat yourself up too much about mistakes, and I should be saying that to myself, because I quite often let things whir around in my head quite a lot, and but I think it's important that when you do make mistakes, you learn from it, pick yourself back up, and take that on in a positive way to the next challenge you're going to take on. But it's very easy to let things bother you a lot, and I'd recommend not doing that.
I think that's a really good one. I think we were discussing before we started recording about the world of social media, and that everything is made to look like it's perfect, and the reality is very different to that. And I think it's somehow not seen as correct or cool or right, to make mistakes, but at the end of the day, that's how we learn from it. And it's a shame that it's not more encouraged. It's definitely something I think as a society we can do better on.
Yeah, and I think I've been on expeditions where we weren't successful getting to the top, and I've had to reflect on those over time. And obviously the business in Bavaria where we had to call that a day. So I've had periods in my life where I've had to overcome disappointment or frustration, and sort of work through that in time. I think in terms of one of the biggest things for me, and I've thought about this before in terms of strengths and weaknesses around that, is that one of the challenges I have for myself is, in a way, my greatest strength is also my greatest weakness, in that in order to do what I've done, whether it be expeditions or working in the outdoors and so on, you need to be somebody who's very good at getting into the detail and analysing things and assessing things and doing risk assessments on things. So, I think that's something I'm probably reasonably strong at, and it's been my life. The downside of that is I sometimes analyse things to death.
Yeah.
And so, you spend, waste a lot of energy on, analysing things. So sometimes when things have happened in my life, I probably give it too much time and exhaust myself, sometimes doing that.
So if you could give future leaders of the outdoor industry 3 pieces of advice, what would you give them?
I think, that in order to take the outdoors forward, I think, the leaders need to engage with all levels. I think, it's really important to understand what's going on the ground in the outdoors, and those people are delivering out there every day. I think that's super important. I think one of the things that always disappoints me is that I just don't think, of course, there are some people that are very into the outdoors, but I think generally and widely, the outdoors aren't valued as much as they should be, because they're a phenomenal place. They're a phenomenal learning environment for children or adults, people who are doing it for fun or people who are doing it for work and business. They're just the best environment And, my partner said to me earlier, talking about the outdoors, that there's nothing you can't get from the outdoors. It's so diverse, it's so powerful that I think, taking that forward as leaders to try and sell to the right people the importance of the outdoors. Schools that don't do the outdoors disappoints me massively. I think every single school in UK should be doing outdoor activities, for sure. And if they can push that, that'll be important.
Brilliant. I think that's a good place to finish. So thank you very much, Dave, for your time and for sharing. It's been a pleasure listening to your stories and getting to know you today, and obviously in the run up to this recording. So thanks for your time, and yeah, take care.
Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed my chat with Dave as much as I did. If you did, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Thanks for your support, and I look forward to seeing you soon for our next episode.